So depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon. We are here to talk about, this is quite a mouthful, combining EDI initiatives in business education and industry to create long-lasting impact in the workplace. It definitely sounds like an Academy of Management Referee Journal article title, but you have to consider our source. In any event, my name is Peter Aranda, and on behalf of the Simon Business School at the University of Rochester and the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management, thank you everyone for joining us. The consortium was founded in 1966 and represents a thriving partnership between business schools and industry. And Simon has served as a consortium member school since 1968. I've had the pleasure of serving as the executive director and CEO of the consortium since 2003. I'm also a consortium alumnus from the Washington University in St. Louis, class of 1987. And prior to leading the consortium, I was a management consultant with Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, and my own firm. I also served as a for-profit division leader at MCA and Bertelsmann. And today, this esteemed panel is here to discuss the need for deeper collaboration between industry and business schools regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion. As a nation, we're counting on business leaders to advance EDI in the workplace. And we're also counting on business schools to train the next generation of business leaders to become change agents for EDI. Collectively, we seek to change the perceptual framing of EDI from a minority problem to an American opportunity. To kick us off, I'm going to ask that each panelist introduce themselves and address the following question or the following topical area. We hear a lot of talk, and we see some evidence that diverse teams are more productive and can drive profitability. But does that suffice as a compelling case? What is your best argument for championing EDI in business schools and the workplace? And what specific examples can you provide from your school, company, or industry that demonstrate performance improvements, especially at the bottom line? James, would you please kick us off?
Yes, good morning and or good afternoon, and it's an honor to be here with you all today. It's just an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Peter, regarding the question, what's the business case for DEI? The reality of it is, as demographics continue to change, if we are not, as we talk about in our organization, relevant, easy, and distinctive, and by the way, I'm with Young Brands. I'm the Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer for Young Brands. You know us as Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, and Habit Burger Grill. In our brands, we talk about being relevant, easy, and distinctive. And so the case for EDI is we want to be relevant, easy, and distinctive for all guests. And if we're not, we miss out on opportunities to increase our sales, to build long-term business success. In order to be relevant, you need to be representative of the demographics in your organization so you can get influence, impact, ideas, innovation, and things of the like. And that representation needs to exist not only at the most junior levels, but also all the way up through leadership. And so from my perspective, that's the value and the business case for DEI. We've seen a number of companies that weren't relevant, easy, or distinctive that have gone by the wayside over time, and we don't want to be that. In terms of specific items and insights that we know about and are paying attention to, is if you look at the United States today, the average age of our Hispanic Latino community is right around 30.4 years. The average age of the non-Hispanic white is 42.3 years. And then there's Asian and Black demographics that are in between those two. Why any of that matters is because as the demographics shift, the data comes from an individual by the name of Mike LaCosta, who runs a company called Ethnifacts, ETHNIFACTS. And what Mike shares with us is that All of the growth in the future in the United States will come from multicultural people. So if we don't have those multicultural people in our organization and they have a much longer, how do we want to say, effective buying power years than our main demographic, or at least our majority demographic today, if we don't have all of those demographics, our business will become irrelevant and will tail off literally by the numbers. And so for those reasons, that's why we believe EDI is important. That's why we're focused on it, and that's why we work hard to stay relevant, easy, and distinctive in our brand. So I'll stop there to allow other comments.
Thank you, James. Norman, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Hello, everyone. Norman Jones, Global Director of University Recruitment at Danaher Corporation. And when I first read this question, my initial thought was, is 2023 a business case shouldn't be needed for championing EDI in any space, full stop. But to be respectful and answer the question, my initial thought is the world is diverse. Business schools and workplaces should reflect the world we are living in. Diverse teams bring new thoughts and ideas to the tables, which can foster inclusive learning in the classroom and can also drive profitability in the workplace. So that's my business case for championing EDI in both the workplace and in a school environment.
Thank you, Norman. Peter?
Hi, thank you, Peter, and thank you for letting me join this important panel. It's a pleasure. I'm Peter Rodriguez, Dean of the Jones Graduate School of Business at Rice University. There's a strong business case for EDI. Sure, I can tell you that from my perspective, I hear it all the time, particularly from employers. They absolutely crave having more diverse leaders in their workforce for some of the reasons that James mentioned and Norman mentioned. And so in the business school case, you could narrowly view it that way and say, well, of course, we need to prepare leaders to do that. And we need diverse leaders to help bring the perspectives that those companies need. And they want them for the reasons that have been mentioned before. I don't think that's sufficient. I think it's also just the morally right thing to do. We want to be treated well and to be included well, and to really have a high functioning workplace or any positive relationship. And those are really one and the same. You have to make people feel valued and feeling included. And if they can't be seen and understood and accepted and bring their whole selves to the office and the workplace and relationships, that won't be possible. And as the population continues to diversify, we'll need leaders who are capable of doing that. I've certainly seen that it has helped us when we've gotten more diverse. Being a part of the consortium has absolutely helped us to do that. Sometimes it just takes a broader number, a sense of acceptance, a sense of value to enable people to bring their perspectives to light, start to develop, take more leadership roles, or dare to take more leadership roles and learn about themselves. And I think that's part of the pedagogical case, is that inviting everyone to be able to do that is vital to the health of business schools. It's going to be vital to the health of organizations in the future and preparing leaders. Lastly, I would just say it's not simple for people. I think they have to work to do it. And it's often challenging, or they have fears, and we have to enable them to do that. But I think the business case is stronger than ever, and it should have always been strong. But I'm happy to say it's as strong as ever.
Thank you, Peter. Shavan?
Hello, thank you. Glad to be here and participate in this panel. I'm Shevin Yaltekin. I'm the Dean of Simon Business School. A lot of great points have been made, and I think whether you're in the business of running a business school, whether you're in a corporate business or another type of nonprofit business, talent management is what we do. We do it for our organization, and we know that our students, as they become business leaders in the future, they're going to manage talent. A lot of our time, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, has been spent thinking about sort of turnover. Where do we actually source talent? How do we retain that talent? How do we actually ensure that we are giving and providing both the skill sets and also the environment for everyone to really professionally and academically excel? And I think taking that mindset and infusing that mindset into the education by getting students started on this from the moment that they walk onto campus, from the orientation programming to having them form diverse teams so that they know how to work with people from a variety of backgrounds, whether that's racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, education backgrounds, as well as thinking about sort of the geographic backgrounds, and being very also steeped in understanding, you know, who's at the table, who's represented in these committees, in these leadership positions, in these clubs, so that it becomes a fabric or part of the fabric of how they think about an organization. Because if we don't, the same way that I think, you know, James is thinking about finding that market and finding that customer and finding that group of people that have that buying power, we have to think about that talent. And that talent, if we don't tap into that talent, we're losing a lot of opportunities, and we're certainly spinning our own wheels. And we need to teach the students as well on how to manage that diverse talent, because a lot of times our students go to global companies, they go to companies that have a variety of folks coming from all sorts of backgrounds, and thinking about even, you know, disability. How do I reach this audience? How do I make sure that people can actually access my website or my product, or, you know, participate in meetings, whether we're thinking about other ways in which to include people. But I also agree with both what Norman and Peter has said about it. You know, we started with the sort of the moral imperative and then moved on to maybe the business case for it. Now I think it's the values driven. You know, you want to put a stake in the ground as a values driven place to say, this is what we really value. And we value this diversity, we value the sense of belonging, we value people bringing their authentic selves to work and to the classroom. And I think this is where we can move on to the next stage of our equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts.
Thank you, Shaveen. For our next question, I'd like to ask James and Norman to address this. And the question is, what are some of the effective EDI initiatives businesses are using that can be imported into business schools, not just organizationally, but also to enhance the classroom interaction? And as you identify examples, we're looking for examples that not only touch the individual, but can transform the culture of an entire organization. James, what say you?
Yeah, I think one of the initiatives I'll just share that we leverage is this whole notion of reverse mentorships, and the reverse mentorship piece. And this is likely you're going to say, well, I mean, that's not rocket science, and the answer is you're right. But the whole notion of reverse mentorships is to set individuals up to have the permission to learn about each other, to have open dialogue. The foundational premise of reverse mentorships is to literally be able to ask someone anything that you ever wanted to know, to get to learn about them, their culture, their background, their experiences, and all those types of things. And why that's important is because as we look at what's going on in the world today, as I look at what's going on in our organization, as we look at what typically happens when it comes to EDI, is we have more representation in the lower ranks, but that representation doesn't make it up to the higher ranks at the same speed and at the same representation as maybe the demographic is in the broader country or the organization versus the country. And so as we look at why that is, the data shows us that that's what happens. We call it the cliff. The question is, what's driving that cliff? And the answer from my perspective is, I'm not putting my name on anybody that I don't know. I'm not going to sponsor them. I'll mentor them all day long, but I'm not going to sponsor them for that next level unless I know them. So what we're working on here, and I think can be leveraged in the business schools, is how do we create reverse mentorship? So what we do, I'll give you one quick example. We have our chief legal and franchise officer, majority male, mid-40s, mid to upper 40s. He's being reverse mentored by an African-American male who is 9 levels below where he is and not in his line of leadership. When we got those two together, the directive was senior leader, your whole role in this reverse mentorship is to simply get to know this individual. Dogs, cats, kids, birds, upbringing, what the experience is like being an African-American male here at Young Brands, and all of those things. What took place is it was scheduled for 6 months. What took place is we're 14 months in and I can't get these guys apart. And the reason is because now they've built art, not science, not numbers, but they built art. And art is authentic relationships that have led to trust. And that's played out even better now as because they have art, that senior leader has now sponsored this young man to get into a new role. And so all that happened through this very simple thing called the reverse mentorship. And so that is one thing I think can take place in the college campus. It doesn't have to be senior to junior. It can be culture to culture reverse mentorship. It can be capability, maybe someone especially able. What is it like to be that? What can you share? What can I learn about you? How can I help? So it just, you get the concept. It doesn't have to be higher to lower. It can be across all differences. But the point is, the mentality coming in is, I'm not going to come and impart knowledge on you from on high. What I'm going to do is build a relationship with you.
Thank you, James. Norman, please share your perspective on this topic.
Yep, I'm glad James talked about reverse mentoring because I've been a part of reverse mentoring as a Black gay man working in corporate America for the last 16 years. It's been a struggle at times. So I have mentored senior leaders on what it's like to be a Black man in America, a gay man in America, and a Black gay man in America, because those intersections are all different. They don't always get along. But also I've had the privilege of being mentored by women, people with disabilities, veterans, so I could truly become a better ally to them, so I could hear their story, hear what they've been through to get to where they were at that present day and time when we were meeting. So I'm definitely glad that James touched on reverse mentoring. A couple of EDI initiatives that I've seen done effectively at companies I worked at that are inexpensive, so it should be very easy for business schools to sort of incorporate into their practices. One is training on pronouns and why using a proper pronoun for someone is important to them. It may not be important to you, but why is it important to that person that you use this correct pronoun when addressing them? Some other things I've seen done are to build an inclusive culture, just making sure that videos that you have on your website and your intranet channels have closed caption on them, have a sign language interpreter at town halls, ensuring that when you're having a work event that you have food that's gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, nut-free. Having those options will make those employees feel like they don't always have to be the one raising their hand saying, what can I eat? Do you have this? Because again, it's all about building that inclusive culture. Some other things we've also done is just making sure that we always come with respect to each other. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about EDI, people always feel a little nervous about talking about that subject because you don't want to offend. So just making sure that anytime we gather together with our business resource group or employee resource groups or come together to talk about things that are happening in this world, Roe versus Wade being overturned, the murder of George Floyd, and so many other Black and brown individuals in this world, just like the violence we see happening against our Asian brothers and sisters in this country, making sure that we come understanding that people are coming to learn and knowledge share, and come understanding that no one has coming to the table with ill intent. If they say the wrong thing, ask them, probe and ask probing questions about why you said that, so you can really get to the root of what they're trying to ask and help them understand why what they may have said has been offensive to you or could be offensive to others. So those are just some things I've seen done in corporations I worked at that are inexpensive. I think schools can incorporate. And I mean, it's sometimes gonna be messy, sometimes it's gonna be challenging, but if you come to the table with a willingness to learn and respect, then you can get to where you hopefully you want to get to.
Thank you so much, Norman. The next question is for Peter and Shavin. In this topical area, how can business schools help prepare future leaders to become change agents for diversity and inclusion in all of its forms, including racial, gender, geographic, and generational diversity? And what specific initiatives and programs can MBA programs implement to foster this kind of leadership? Peter?
Sure, happy to kick off with a little bit. I do think it's one of our primary charges to prepare students to be able to do this. And so we think hard about it. We've had to change. I think lots of business schools have thought about how to do this well. And so it's great to be together and learn from Shavine and others about how they do this. I think the number one thing you do is you help students have the confidence to speak. You give them chances to find their voice. And then we need to model some of the practices that they can use to have the conversations that are often difficult. I think especially in this day and age, I know that our students find that there's great safety in silence. You know, they're a little worried about offending on one end or the other. And so they're absolutely biting their tongues sometimes, one way or the other. And this collectively leads to, the loss of an academic growth opportunity. To get around that, we need our professors and we need to have venues where they can talk, and they're shown that people can talk about topics that are sensitive or seen as sensitive. They can be comfortable expressing some of their own ignorance, asking questions that aren't so easy. And that's super important for them to do. And so we have things like a diversity lab where we study different parts of our own school, different units, and ask how they're doing on diversity initiatives or ask different questions. We had we've had all sorts of things. I can remember the simplest one. So Norman mentioned food. Food actually comes up a lot, during different times of the year. Different holidays are observed. We're having celebrations that always have alcohol, but none other drinks. You can have other options just to make people feel included. So that's one. I'd say the second, and then I'll stop, would be that they have to be in diverse audiences in order to do that. You need to be able to have those discussions with people who are different from you, so that they can share with you their perspectives. And if we don't create that, we're missing out on a big opportunity for it. I should have said that's the last thing I said. I think the last thing we've done is we've created research forums that I think have been useful. So when some of our professors talk about the research and where the research on issues that intersect with diversity topics, that's useful to hear how people think about managing, evidencing, studying these complex issues. It not only gives them someone on the faculty with whom they can talk about this at a more academic level, but it helps them approach some of the topics in a way they haven't thought of before.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Shavine?
Yes, so I think Peter has touched on quite a few nice aspects of how business schools certainly can train students to be change agents, and by that we mean all students, right? I think you touched upon this, Peter, that this is not a problem to be solved by our minority or our underrepresented students. This is an imperative that we need to approach together, and you need to infuse it into the fabric of the institution so that our students become very, very used to working with different groups of students, working with different kinds of faculty, being able to recognize, yes, we're having a club meeting, and did we set it at a time when somebody's breaking their fast because it's Ramadan? Did we set it at a time when it's maybe it's a Jewish holiday? And so really getting them to almost every day do that practice of thinking about who's included, what are we being, obviously we also have to run educational programs and run a business if we're a business, so we can't completely be hampered by all sorts of different kinds of preferences, but it's I think to really show our students how to be change agents, we need to be change agents ourselves. It needs to be in our communications. It needs to be in the assets and the content that we put out. We need to show that we hold people accountable when they behave in certain ways that goes against our values. We need to show that we are providing incentives as well as sort of nudging from the faculty to the staff to join trainings, to include more content, EDI content, into their classrooms, to talk about some of the difficult concepts and difficult issues, whether that's redlining when we're talking about real estate and finance, or access to credit, that we provide resources, and there are resources out there so that we can make it easy. And I really like what Norman has said about sort of giving people grace, because a lot of times when we are doing this kind of almost behavioral change in a way, right? It's not just training, it's not just academic training, behavioral change in a lot of different ways, that we need to be able to have that grace to be able to stumble and make mistakes and maybe say the wrong thing and maybe not use the right pronoun and so on. But it just takes, like anything else, a lot of practice. So I would say for us to become really, just like we train anybody to do computing or math and finance and so on, it's just a lot of practice at all aspects, from curricular to co-curricular to messaging to the way that we display our values. Just practice, 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 and really, show by example.
Indeed, it's that old cliche, practice makes perfect. When I look at the next topic, I'd like it to address this to Peter and James. And this topic is, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks of mandating equity, diversity, and inclusion training for business school students? And do you believe that this approach is an effective means of preparing MBA candidates for the workplace? Why don't you kick us off, Peter?
Sure. This is it's an interesting challenge. I bet everyone who's been at a business school has faced it. You can have great diversity training, voluntary or electives or courses, and the people who will tend to go are the people who might need it the least, and the people who will need it the most or who have the least familiarity will be highly reluctant to go and attend. And so you'll end up sort of stoking, good productive conversations, but amongst a population that is already thinking carefully about this, maybe further down the road. And you really haven't done much to change the community. And so in that sense, I think some portion of this has to be mandatory. Shaveen, said something I thought was really important. From the beginning, statements of values about EDI from the school are really critical. And then, as was said earlier, you can't lead what you don't live, and so you have to have ways that you show it everywhere that you operate in your own practices, managing the school and otherwise. And so we've struggled with this in particular. I think we have some EDI training for everybody. It tends not to be as deep and as rich as may be needed, but it sort of highlights the values and is useful. The drawback is that the more you do that, in my experience anyway, the more that you do that, you do get some resistance, or you do face, I think a lot of, it's a high bar for some faculty to try to do a whole course on that. I can talk about that in a later question. They might feel that it's taking too much time away from their other activities. There's already so much to do and so much you want to get done. So I think we have to have both some mandatory and some optional. I think the days where this was something that you could signal was okay to not have are probably gone or going quickly, and that would be good. But it's going to be a challenge. I think you can just look around the country today. It might be a challenge to have any of them at all. Speaking from a private school, we have much more flexibility to do things like that, and I think we'll retain that. But it's not going to be the case at already isn't the case at public universities, where you have that flexibility at all. And so it's a challenging time. I think that should redouble our efforts in many ways, but it will also probably be useful for us to think about how we approach making sure that everybody can participate and feel that they aren't so compelled that it crowds out, things that they otherwise view as valuable. So it's a challenge, but you have to have something required, in my view.
Thank you, Peter. James, please share with us.
Ooh, this question, this issue, it is, as Peter mentioned, with all that's going on in the world today, and definitely in the country, this is a really difficult question, for all the reasons that Peter mentioned. I agree with Peter in the context of there needs to be, there likely needs to be some amount that's mandatory. But I too feel like, especially again with all that's going on, the more we make it mandatory, we're going to run into more challenges, and folks are going to be pushing back. And then there's a whole W word out there today that folks start to bring forward. So what I would challenge us to think about is how do we not mandate it, but how do we embed it? How do we embed it in every aspect of our schools, of our education? And when I say embed, I'm talking about when we're talking when we're engaged in our leadership development courses, it should be embedded there. And it couldn't be as simple as, we're talking about leadership development, we're talking about managing teams and things of this nature, embedded in the fabric of managing teams who are different. So on your team consists of these individuals, to include those who are specially able, those who are have different lifestyles, those who are different ethnically, and you just build it into or embed it into the work. When you think about, I think about finance. When we're talking about finance, in many cases, we're talking about finance just simply and tangibly from the numbers and the numerics around finance. What if we embed in there this whole notion of how do folks think about finance in different countries? What does that look like? And you start to go down this notion of, well, it's not just finance. It's how do folks think about finance? What is important in this country where we have significant differentials in versus US dollar and other countries? Is it viewed the same? How do those countries react and respond? How do they leverage finance and these kinds of things? So this whole notion of embedding it in all aspects of what we do, regardless of the course, I think is a way for us to get away from this notion of, quote, mandating as much as it becomes, and I truly believe this to be the case. Instead of it being mandated, it becomes a core leadership skill set. It becomes a core, a required perspective that an individual has to bring to the table. As demographics continue to change, as globalization now it is just who we are, as technology to include ChatGPT and other things of that nature, as all of those things come to life, it's this notion of how do you think as a global citizen, as a global leader? That's what's going to be required to be successful in business school, in business going forward, which de facto requires you to be not knowledgeable, be able to engage, and to be able to understand multiple cultures. And I'll stop right after this comment, but when we think about one of the things, we have an office in Dubai, and in that office, some of our US expats have gone there, and they come back and say, James, I was struggling in the United States to learn a little bit of Spanish as we navigate things like that. In Dubai, folks are speaking 3 and 4 languages. That's going to be a requirement to understand those different cultures, to understand the different languages. Even if you don't know the language and can't speak it fluently, are you aware of the customs, to Seven's point, the customs and the cultures? How do you be respectful in these areas? That should all be embedded in this whole notion of business school course and curriculum.
Thank you so much, James. The next question, I'm going to direct it back to the deans. And for this topic, what are some of the key challenges that business schools face when trying to bring faculty on board with EDI initiatives, and how can schools overcome these challenges? And then specifically, what strategies can be utilized to engage faculty in this important work? Seven?
Sure, absolutely. I think we've touched upon some of those already. I would say that there are 2 immediate sort of obstacles, right? my job as a dean or as somebody who is trying to sort of bring in change is going to be, if I can make the obstacles as low as possible or eradicate them, hopefully this embedding that James is talking about is going to become easier, right? And two places. One of them is that the faculty think that they just don't have the domain knowledge to be able to speak to EDI issues. That's not how they were trained throughout their training. They don't know how to have these very difficult conversations in class. They're afraid of saying the wrong things sometimes. They're afraid of even the conversation between the students or in the class environment, kind of, as they would call it, go off the rails. They don't know how to bring it back. And they want frameworks. You know, I mean, a lot of our faculty like to talk about, I love that. I think it was James who said that it's not just about imparting knowledge, it's about actually actively listening and participating. So one issue is, how do we get faculty to be comfortable with the content or with kind of difficult conversations or topics that can be quite sensitive in the classroom? And we need to give them some skills on that part. The second part of it is that for faculty who are even kind of one step ahead and want to incorporate a lot of the content or want to talk about courses or even develop some modules in this classroom, what are some of the good resources that we can provide for them? So for example, our director of EDI, executive director of EDI at Simon, meets with faculty and goes over their syllabus, everything from the language of the syllabus to some of the content and how to help them frame some of the questions that might arise in the classroom, and how do we set some kind of guardrails, right? We don't just walk into the classroom completely unready and pop up a very controversial topic or question, but to say, listen, we're going to talk about this. This is going to be sort of, you know, might be triggering for some, might get some people sort of step on certain toes, or might get some people excited, but here is how we're going to, this is the value system we want to impose. We're an academic institution. We want to be able to talk about different opinions without it getting, you know, becoming disrespectful and so on. And as administrators, we need to stand behind our faculty. I mean, we read in the news about faculty trying to show something like a picture in class that one group of students had found kind of offensive, even though they had been given lots and lots of warning ahead of time, from the first class to the syllabus to the immediate class where that was shown that this might not be something that they are comfortable with. Yet the administrating kind of, you know, call them Islamophobic and all sorts of things. So we also need to set the stage as deans, as administrators, to say, this, you know, respectful discourse is what academia is based upon. And we've got your back. Of course, it doesn't mean that you can say anything and everything without repercussions, but to really put some of those guardrails. And the other thing, last thing I would say, is that training in a classroom, training, whether it's mandatory or not, to be able to really embed it. A lot of the EDI training or that we see is made for a corporate world where there is sort of, you know, supervisor versus direct report or type of relationships. A classroom is a completely different thing. And faculty are kind of usually independent agents. So what we did at Simon is develop our own from the ground training for faculty. We got a lot more participation. We got some great conversations going. I would love for business schools to be able to have almost like a repository of such training that we develop, that we share with each other, from examples to sort of how to set the stage, to workshops, to simulations, whatever have you. And I think we just need to kind of get in there and a little bit do it ourselves.
Thank you, Shaveen. Peter, please share your perspective with us.
Sure. Well, you know, I would say I 100% agree with Shaveen on those topics. You know, the ones that I experience are just the ones she mentioned, and they are challenging to overcome. Just emphasize again that faculty do feel that this is outside of their domain. If you think about who faculty are, they typically have a very narrow topic they know deeply. They like discussing it. And even our faculty who have done work on issues that are really interesting and critical and reveal something about DEI or evidence, structural racism or evidence, structural issues, can find it very difficult to talk about. Even our organizational behavior faculty will say, I'm a little less, willing to talk about that than I was before. Or they might say, I believe I cover this, or I cover it in a way that, should have included this or could be extrapolated to include those cases. That's difficult to overcome. One of the ways we attempted to overcome it and have seen some success is just by giving the faculty in those groups a broader charge and sort of asking, when we look back at all of our experience and all of our programming, both the curricular and the co-curricular, where are these topics being covered? We need to own the whole thing and say, have we had conversations about, and you fill in the blank with all of this, everything that's been talked about today, whether it's pronouns or religion or age or any other group, any other topic. And what you find are the gaps. And together, a group of people can say, that should be intolerable. We've got to do something there. What will we do? And to meet them, as the dean and with our senior associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion, talk about, well, what do we bring into our program to address this one way or the other? So that sort of gap analysis that doesn't look to, well, I think what it does, I think it removes some sense of blame from people that says it has to be you, it has to be your course, everybody has to do the same thing. So that's one. I think the second thing that we've done is sometimes we've created task forces that have been productive and have led to longstanding efforts. So in the wake of George Floyd's killing, he was brought back to Houston to be buried. We stood up a task force on racial equity and social justice that asked students and members of the community and alums and faculty to review the school itself, similarly identify gaps or ways forward, and to take joint ownership of how we would provide some solutions. So we did that. And I think that, again, brought people together in a way that helped us look at our flaws, look at our failures, and do something positive that was useful. But it's difficult to overcome that one issue. And lastly, I would just want to reemphasize Shaveen's point that I do think faculty really want us to stand up for them and to stand up for that idea that, yes, we want to talk about these issues. We may be imperfect, we will learn, but if we aren't allowed to be imperfect, then we will be silent again, and that's worse. And so we need to do something about that part. And I think standing up for them in conspicuous ways can be very, very useful, as long as we meet them with training and support and these discussions that help us take the right stance on the right issues.
Thank you, Peter. Directing the next question to Norman and Shaveen, how do we help our students identify companies that are true champions of EDI? What should these students be looking for? What questions should they be asking? What information should they be seeking? Norman, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So first, the student needs to know what is important to them when it comes to EDI before they can start looking into companies and their EDI practices. Once the student knows what's important to them from an EDI standpoint, then they need to do their homework to see if the companies they are considering joining align with what they value. Look at the company's leadership page to see if the diverse makeup of the board and leadership team sits. Are you looking and only seeing diversity in roles like the chief diversity officer? When you think about ethnic diversity and leadership, are you only seeing female leaders in this chief marketing officer role or the CHR role? Check and see how robust their DEI page is on their website. Do they share their diversity statistics over the past 3 to 5 years? Do they highlight their employee resource groups? Do they list out the diverse organizations they partner with for recruiting purposes, but also for developing and retaining a diverse talent? When you're interviewing, ask the interviewer from the business, not the recruiter, how diverse is the team I'll be joining? How do you develop talent? What do you value from a team perspective, and how do you foster an environment and a culture of inclusive learning on that team? Because as a leader, you can't really drive what the culture of the overall organization is going to be, but you can make sure that you are driving an inclusive culture on the team or the department that you oversee. And also just seek out alumni from your undergraduate school or business school that worked at companies you were considering joining and ask them, how diverse is this company? Like, what do you think of their EDI practices? Do they have EDI practices? Will I, as a woman or as a Black man or as a Latinx or Asian individual, feel comfortable working here? As an LGBTQ plus individual, will I be comfortable bringing my partner to work event? So it's just something the students need to do, and I recommend they do when determining a company they want to join. But you have to do your research. You have to understand what you value from an EDI perspective before you can think about joining any company.
I think Norman has so beautifully summed all of them up. I have very little to almost add at that point, but I think homework is absolutely the crucial word here. You know, with the ability to do so much more research as opposed to when I started my career, there are so many resources available, and it's really going behind those taglines or behind that what is sort of looks like window dressing, right? Oh, we have an EDI officer, or we have this plan. Are they actually putting out updates on their plans? Are they putting out statistics? Can you see who's interviewing you, and how, does that at least represent some sort of diversity? What are some of the initiatives that they talk about? What is the tone of some of their communications? Because everybody has a Twitter page, a web page, a LinkedIn page. You can really actually go and learn a lot about the company. And I completely agree that I think one of the things that we can do, whether it's through our network, is to talk to a few people and ask these very direct questions about, what's it like to be working there? What's it like to, do they really value diversity, and how do they show that? And how do they actually kind of, it's not just me writing a diversity paragraph into my cover letter, but it's actually actions that you can point to and that they can point to, that you can tally up as where the values of a company is. And I think that homework is essential if this is something that you care about, which you should, as a student, with all the resources available to you. Definitely go in doing your homework, and keep an open eye when you're going through the interviewing process. Who are you seeing? Who's at the table? Who's interviewing you? What are they talking about? What kind of questions they're asking? It's not just an opportunity for them to learn about you. It's a huge opportunity for you to learn about them.
Thank you, Shaveen. This is our last question from me, the moderator, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A for the panelists. This one I'm directing at Norman and James, and the question is, or the topical area is, what is a simple but effective and sustainable feedback and collaboration loop business schools and companies can create to align their talent management, training, and initiatives? How do we bolster each other's activities? Norman, why don't you kick us off on this topic too, please?
Sure. So first and foremost, you have to be open to all feedback, the good and the bad. My team hosts end of the year reviews with each university we recruit at to provide them with our roses and thorns from the recruiting season. And we ask the school representatives to come to the table ready to share their roses and thorns, because I definitely feel that the feedback needs to be a two-way street. It just can't be us saying what we liked or didn't like about recruiting at your university. You have to tell us what you heard about our company at this school, where we sort of dropped the ball and where we did well. So we continue to have that great relationship with the university, or become a better partner with that university. And I think once each side has shared that feedback, really sitting down and talking with each other to understand how we can better collaborate and partner together, how we can ensure that the school knows what we as an organization value and what we're looking for future hires. And then the school can understand how they can support our needs. But more importantly, as a corporation, as a partner of that university, me and my recruiters need to understand what that school needs from us, so that way we can continue to show up correctly for them and their students. Because at Danaher and with my university recruitment team, we realized that we have 5 important stakeholders when we look at recruiting at universities, and 2 of those stakeholders are students and the universities we recruit at. So ensuring that we are aligned and we're on the same page with regards to what we all value and what we want to accomplish each recruiting season is, I think, a good and effective way to make sure that you're constantly having that feedback loop, so that way no one's surprised at the end of the year when you have to sunset a relationship, or a school is telling you, hey, like, my students weren't really interested in your company because of X, Y, Z. If you had that open line of dialogue continuously, and schools are sharing feedback with us, we're sharing feedback with schools, real time, then you can course correct in that moment, as opposed to going a whole recruiting season not understanding where you're falling down and where you're doing well.
Thank you, Norman. James?
I would simply agree with everything that Norman said, and just this whole notion of that open dialogue And are we complementary of each other? Complementary being have the same, understand the values of the organization, understand the culture of the organization. And then there's this whole notion of, as we talk about EDI, for us is a thing, but this whole notion of, how do we mitigate bias? How do we mitigate bias in the conversation? In this case, as it pertains to companies. There's folks who have said, hey, look, I just can't get behind what you all do at Yum Brands, right? Given okay, great. While I understand that we are a QSR and that may not be, for everybody, we get that. However, that shouldn't impact what we're trying to do here, which is to create opportunities for students. And so what are those opportunities, and what are some things that we can do? It's to have the talent management and the faculty understand who we are. So one of the things that we can do is do visits, pilot things back and forth across, hey, we're looking at doing this. I think about folks don't know who we really are. And I asked this, and Peter knows this, Peter Randa knows this, at our consortium events, I always start off with asking, so if you went home and told your parents you were going to go to work for Taco Bell, KFC, or Pizza Hut after you get done with B school, what would they say? And the room always erupts in laughter. Some people say, can I get a credit? Can I get a gift card? And this kind of thing. But what folks really don't know is that we've been a part of Pepsi, and we separated from Pepsi in 1997. Since then, while I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night, the financials tell us that we've performed very well over time, in many cases better than most. What I would tell you is that when the economy is good, we're good. When the economy is struggling, we're actually better. But people don't financially understand who we are because they don't know us. We run into some of those things with the school, with the talent management teams, when the students are looking for opportunities. There's companies and organizations that are sexier than potentially ours are. But when you look at the opportunities that we have, we match wit, we match capability, we match knowledge, expertise, and we match opportunities around the globe with any other company. And so this whole notion, what's the feedback loop? The feedback loop is making sure that we are in communication with the talent management team, making sure that the faculty understands who we are, what we're doing, and what true opportunities that we're looking to fill. And most importantly, making sure that you all know from an education perspective that our job here at Yum Brands is to make sure that your student is successful here. So that's I will leave it at that.
All right, thank you so much, James. So right now, I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions for the panelists. I've been monitoring the Q&A panel throughout the discussion. There's some great commentary in there from our audience members, and I know the panelists have all seen that commentary. I want to tease out one of the questions that was in that commentary, and it's directed to the distinction between the area of diversity and inclusion and the concept of equity. And this particular audience member identifies a real challenge being equity. And how do we get our arms around that? How and when can you, as honest change agents, actually respond to the systemic nature of the root cause of long-term inequities? And I'd like to put that out for the panel. And I won't call names, just if you feel like speaking, speak up.
Well, what I would say is, at the end of the day, that's my job. Equity, inclusion, and we call it equity, inclusion, belonging for the sake of today is called EDI. That's the work. That's the real work. And all the other things that you've heard me speak to are the foundational basis by which we are behind the scenes working on those systemic issues. If you talk to the Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging leadership team here at Young Brands, we'll talk about it in the context of equitable hiring practices. We'll talk about it in the context of coach capability. And so we are every day working on that. I didn't call it out today, but that's what we do every single day is we look at what are the systemic challenges, what are the historic opportunities. That whole notion of the reverse mentorships is this notion of, if I know you and I trust you, when I see inequities, I'm going to raise that. And so there is a method to the madness around the actions that we're taking to address the foundational and the systemic underlying challenges that have been there. So it is the job, you know, when can you, as an honest change maker, actually respond to systemic nature and the root cause? We're doing that every day,
I would add that as a educational institution, again, education certainly changed my life, and I know that it has a huge impact. Of course, by the time students come to us, they've gone through at least high school. You know, if they're entering in as undergraduates, or if we're talking about the masters and higher graduate programs. There are lots of inequities along the way that we can't really immediately fix. But thinking about sort of where we can make a big impact, I mean, for us, I think it's really about the equity of access and equity of opportunity. I mean, this is what James is talking about too. So it starts with being able to break down some of those barriers as to how to even, application process. For example, I went over this with my own daughter, applying to college. It is a messy process. It requires a lot of time, a lot of project management, and an enormous amount of almost domain knowledge, right? And you can think about, students coming from backgrounds where maybe the parents, their first generation, the parents didn't go to college, or the systems have changed so much. And you can see how these are really big barriers from the moment of that sort of application process, all the way to finding financial resources, scholarships, financial aid packages, so that the barrier is not a financial barrier, so that we can start to break some of those barriers along the way. And again, if we could go back all the way to sort of preschool days and make an impact there and change certain things, we would do that. But at our stage, it's really trying to make sure that there's this equity of access and opportunity. And we've moved away also from sort of looking at very, very strict metrics like test scores and so on and so forth to admit students, to really look at their talents, their interests, their passions, their interpersonal skills, and so on and so forth. Because as we all know, those kinds of metrics like very strict, test scores, again, that's a perpetuation of inequity. People with resources tend to do better in those domains than people who didn't quite have the same resources. So you got to evaluate everything from that lens, whether it's the hiring of our staff, whether it's the recruiting of our students, whether it's giving opportunities while the students are in our classrooms and in our corridors, is to say, am I making this accessible? Am I making these opportunities available to everybody? We've changed our hiring practices at Simon as well, and how we actually think about professional development. And we do that with faculty as well as with the staff as well. But there are many ways I completely agree. That's why it's EDI, equity comes first before diversity and inclusion, but it's the equity of access and equity of opportunity.
Thank you, Shaveen. In the interest of time, there's another question that was posed by the audience. That's a great question. It's beyond our ability to address today, but perhaps I can position it as the next webinar in our unplanned series. But the question is, what will schools do? What can they do? What should they do in the event that the Supreme Court puts a ban on affirmative action? And so that's something for us to think about going forward. It is now noon, or in Missouri, it's noon. It's 1 o'clock elsewhere. But we reached the end of our webinar. I just want to thank our audience for the great comments and questions. I want to thank our panelists, James, Norman, Peter, and Shaveen. I hope that everyone found the discussion insightful and hopefully inspirational as well, because we're counting on everyone who participated today to play a part in advancing EDI in business education and industry. Please, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.